On today's Locked On Dodgers, we talk about that game four on Saturday and some of the things that happened and went on in that game. We'll relive through the pain and we'll go through it and see what we come out on the other side looking like. So that's what's on tap. So make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. This is Locked On Dodgers, and we cover the Los Angeles Dodgers every weekday morning, wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. All you got to do is search for Locked On Dodgers, and you can subscribe in each of those places and make it easy on yourself and never miss a day because you know we're not going to. This is your first time listening or watching, welcome, and what a time to pick your first episode. I'm Vince Samperio. That's my co-host, Jeff Snider, and we're both lifelong Dodger fans who have covered the team and currently cover the team in a few different ways. One of those ways being this podcast where we are here every Monday through Friday for you for about 30 minutes a day. We're not quite insiders, but we're bringing you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue. And yeah, Jeff, this would have been NLCS Game 1 preview. And as we all know, it is not going to be that because the Dodgers are not playing in it. So we both recorded our feelings separate yesterday, and today we'll get to kind of go through some of those feelings as we relive Game 4 that ended up being the end of the Dodgers season.
I assume they canceled the NLCS, right? I haven't heard anything about it. I assume they're just not doing it.
Probably.
Yeah.
Why would
That's good. We do want to welcome all our first-time listeners. We had quite a few first-time listeners on yesterday's episode, a lot of whom seem to be Padres fans, and we appreciate the hate listens. I was feeling a little bit bad that I even brought up the loser San Diego radio host. And to be clear, I don't mind people talking trash on Twitter. I just think it's a sad way to live life that your first reaction to your team doing something great is thinking, who can I make feel bad about this? So that's why I think Stephen Woods is a loser. I had to Google his name before we started, so I remember it. Anyway, but apparently that got out to San Diego circles because we had a lot of listeners, judging by the YouTube comments, a lot of Padre fans checked out our episode yesterday. And I appreciate you guys being here, and I hope you'll keep showing up. I do want to tell you, Javi does a great show over at Locked On Padres, and you guys didn't give him nearly as much love as you gave us. So maybe your hate listens would be better served checking out Locked On Padres, but we definitely do appreciate your hate listens. And if you got time for both, keep checking out both. And we'll probably mention the Padres again after this week. We'll probably mention them again, I don't know, March or something. But until then, thanks for being here. And let's talk about that stupid game on Saturday.
Yeah, that game on Saturday, the Dave Roberts people were out already after the game, which I get, we're going to talk about some of the decisions that can probably contribute to that. But overall, the entire series, just real quick, I don't know how you can watch this entire series and be like, oh yeah, Dave Roberts was the problem, unless you're like, he didn't motivate them or he didn't fire them up or he didn't get them up for a playoff game, which, in theory shouldn't be up to the manager. But, that's really the only way I could conceivably come up here and think about that. Some of the other decisions that were in previous games, of who pitched when and who does what and lineup stuff, that's not all Dave Roberts. So if you want Dave Roberts fired, that also means you probably want, some of the other guys in the front office fired as well. So it's a big thing. There's already been a report that Dave Roberts will be back next year, more than that's probably an accurate report. And yeah, that's where it sits there. But for today, we'll get into decisions on the starting pitching, on, when you took Tyler Anderson out, about the bullpen decisions and about the lineup decisions. And I think maybe where there's probably the least quibble at this point is with the lineup decisions, just because it seemed by the end of it, it was just kind of trying to find the lesser of an evil because those last three spots in the order weren't bringing much production anyways.
Yeah, and it's easy to look at Chris Taylor going 0 for 3 or 3 strikeouts and think, well, I could have told you that was going to happen. And yeah, I think most of us would have predicted roughly 0 for 3 with roughly 3 strikeouts. Where I think I quibble with the people who have a problem with the lineup is, do you really think Cody Bellinger was going to do much better? You know, and he might have. And that's one of my issues with second guessing the manager is we'll never know the alternative. But I really don't think a lack of Cody Bellinger was what cost the Dodgers this game. And so Bellinger was 2 for 17 in his career against Musgrove. Musgrove has reverse splits. You know, Trace Thompson has been better against righties this year. Trace Thompson made sense to have in the game. You know, I wouldn't have minded seeing Joey Gallo just get him in there. You know, I wouldn't have minded seeing Joey Gallo and Miguel Vargas instead of Trace Thompson and Chris Taylor, although that's a much worse defensive outfield. And I don't think Joey Gallo gets to that ball that Trace Thompson caught out in center field. So there's a lot of things they could have done differently, but I have a really hard time saying that Dave Roberts made the wrong choice. And it seemed like most of the people who were clamoring for Bellinger before the game started, it was mostly a sentimental thing. This guy's been great in October. He deserves his chance. It could be his last game as a Dodger, and all that stuff is true. But also, he's been really bad, like all year. And so, he's been good in previous Octobers, and last year he was bad all year and had a huge hit in the NLDS. In 2020, he was bad most of the year and then had a couple of huge home runs in the NLCS and the World Series. But, you know, I just have a hard time thinking not having Cody Bellinger at ninth was the reason the Dodgers lost this game.
Yeah, and I think Gallo's kind of the main one is just because if he does hit it, it's more than likely going to be at least a double or a home run. He started off his Dodger career with a couple singles, but after that, he pretty much went back to who Joey Gallo was. It was either double, home run, strikeout, or walk for the most part. And I would have preferred to kind of see that. At the very least, it's like Chris Taylor. If Chris Taylor makes contact, not guaranteed to be for power. If Cody Bellinger makes contact at this point in his career, not guaranteed to be for power. Trace may be a little bit more guaranteed to be for power, as we saw this year. He kept his OPS afloat by being the guy that hits home runs and doubles at times. But Gallo is pretty much a guy who's going to be able to hit the ball over the wall if he can. And with the Dodgers struggling to score runs, having a guy in there that can add a run, even if it's not likely, but at the very least, he could have done the same as Chris Taylor going over 3 with 3 strikeouts. And, we would have been none for the worse.
Yeah. Although then people would be saying Chris Taylor, could have done better than 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts, even though we know that he didn't. And the thing there, while I would have loved to see Gallo in the lineup just to see what happens, the Dodgers' big issue was putting the bat on the ball. And the only person with a higher strikeout rate for the Dodgers this year than Trace Thompson and Chris Taylor was Joey Gallo. And so it's hard to picture him being the answer to whatever the problem is either.
Yeah, and when it comes down to them, what we talked about before, even coming into this, was you need those top 4 or 5 to be the ones that contribute and bring in the runs, and then everything else after that's kind of gravy. Mookie Betts didn't, he got on base a couple of times in that last game, but overall didn't do much in the series. Trey Turner started off hot the first 2 games, but then after that, cooled down a little bit. Did contribute. Freddie Freeman did contribute. But Will Smith, nothing. Justin Turner, nothing. Max Muncy contributed, but in the end, that all those guys didn't come through like they were supposed to, and then that just makes that bottom of the lineup stand out even more because they're not doing anything. And then if you went deeper on the flip side, the Padres' bottom of the order was doing stuff for them and setting it up for the top of the order. And even though their top of the order didn't do too much, they did come through in that last game in Game 4 because guys at the bottom of the order were on base.
Yeah, the series is actually pretty darn evenly matched. And, the Padres, after 3 games, they were up 2-1, but had outscored the Dodgers by 1 run in the series. They outscored them by a total of, 3 runs in the whole series. And so it was pretty evenly matched, and it's easy to point at the Dodgers sucked in all these ways. And the fact is, other than the 7th inning on Saturday, the Padres sucked in most of the same ways.
Yeah, for the most part, it was, pretty close. But, that's why when you think about it, and kind of when you think it, like, man, the Dodgers were a better team, and they shouldn't be playing it that close, but that's just the way it goes. Next on the list is talking about the decision to pull Tyler Anderson when they did. But before we get into that, let's talk about BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for your football betting info this season. They got all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And BetOnline remains your continued source for your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net on your laptop or mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Jeff. So Tyler Anderson pitched very well for the Dodgers in Game 4, but only ended up going 5 innings. And a decision that was made, and maybe that some people don't agree with. And ultimately, I don't know if it makes a huge difference, anyways, as to what happened. But that's why we're here to talk about what could have been or what may have been had they kept Anderson, or was it just the right decision to pull him when they did? You're on mute.
Sorry, guys. I'm bad with the mute button. I think this is definitely a decision that it's fair to quibble with. I think that, again, we can't know the alternative, but I think Dave Roberts' thinking is it's the top of the order coming up. It's Machado and Soto. And I think most of us probably would have liked to see him at least. I think Soto was leading off the inning. And so you at least go get Soto. If you get Soto, maybe you leave him in for Machado, because the worst Machado can do is make it 2-1, and kind of go batter to batter at that point. That's what I would have preferred. But I understand Dave Roberts' thinking, which is he gave us 5 innings, 5 shutout innings. We've got a lot of good relievers, and we have plenty of guys to get us through the end of this game. And there's part of me that admires the thinking, because I think if they had pulled Anderson, or let Anderson keep going, I think you could have accused Roberts of worrying too much about Game 5 when there's not going to be a Game 5 if you don't get through Game 4. You can't worry about what arms are we going to have available in a game that might not happen. And so I get the thinking, but because the Dodgers had a 2-run lead, and it's funny to say this because later in the game they had a 3-run lead that disappeared really quick. But I would have liked to see Anderson. It's funny because I generally don't like that whole I'm going to pull you as soon as you let a runner get on base approach, because then you're guaranteeing a good chance of a reliever coming in not a clean situation, coming in with runners on base. But the Dodgers had some really good pitchers this year, including Chris Martin, who did follow Tyler Anderson. Chris Martin was lights out at stranding runners. I think it was 22 runners he inherited, and only 5 scored, which is very, very good. And so, when Anderson is your next guy up anyway, I would have liked to see, when Martin is your next guy up, I would have liked to see Anderson stay in the game until a guy got on base, because I do think there's a decent chance he could have gotten through the 6th inning without a run scoring. I have a follow-up to that, but I want to hear your thoughts on that part first.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they should have left Anderson in at that point. He was, pitching well, and it's one of those where, this is kind of where the strategy talk can come in, because, the Dodgers made it with Anderson throwing 6 innings or more pretty consistently, especially over the last like 3 months of the season. I think he only didn't go 6 3 times, and one of that time was in that last week of the season. So I don't, he's a guy who's a pitcher more than like a thrower. So I do think him going through a third time through a lineup, I honestly didn't look up the numbers, but I've trusted him, and obviously they've trusted him because he was going 6 and 7 pretty consistently. But I can understand that you like the bullpen and everything else, but you got to trust your starters sometimes. And yeah, it might doom you, but look, this doomed you as well going the other way. And the part of it also, you look on the other side again and you see Joe Musgrove. Joe Musgrove was up on the ropes. The Dodgers had him on the ropes. He was at 60 some pitches through 3 innings, and he ends up, or in the fourth inning, whatever inning it was, and he ends up going the 6 innings, and they pushed him and they let him go and they let him face the Dodgers top of the order for another time, and it didn't hurt them. And I think that's sometimes what gets into some of these matchups is the reliance on the bullpen, and you're cutting, your starter off a little bit, and you're not pushing anybody, and you're playing in a not playing scared. You're just playing different than kind of what you did in the regular season. In the regular season, they save guys when they need to, if it's the game's out of hand a little bit, or if they're close to pitch count, or it's not worth it. But for the most part, Julio, Kershaw, Anderson were going 6+ innings, nearing 100 pitches on a consistent basis for the most part. Maybe Kershaw a little less, and Julio, especially in the second half of the season, was going deeper into games. So I think it's one of those where that balance hasn't been found, and it's worked at times and it hasn't worked other times. But I would like to see them push starters a little bit more. We've seen a lot of starters in this postseason push through and get through, and some of them are more talented than the three I just mentioned that the Dodgers threw, but some of them aren't.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because a lot of people I've seen saying one of their big gripes was that the Dodgers just treated it like just another game, not enough passion and everything. But for me, this issue is a case of Dave Roberts not treating it like just another game, not trusting what worked through the regular season. Because yeah, I did pull up Tyler Anderson's splits while you were talking, and yeah, everybody gets worse. Almost everybody gets worse each time through the order. First time through the order, opponents have a 596 OPS. Second time 628, third time 698. 698 is still pretty darn good. And the main difference, he walks a few more guys the third time through. And actually, the big difference is he gives up a lot more doubles for some reason. The home run rate is pretty close, but the double rate is almost twice as high as the previous times through the order, which that's something you can deal with. Okay, if Manny Machado hits a double after he gets Juan Soto out, okay, then Manny Machado's on second, and there's in a 2-run game. I like the idea of letting Anderson go. The follow up of what I was going to say was I don't know that it made a huge difference because I think Tommy Kahnle was going to pitch in this game, and the big issue was that Tommy Kahnle didn't have it, and I don't think the Dodgers ran out of relievers. I don't think the Dodgers went to Tommy Kahnle because Tyler Anderson had been pulled early. They went to Tommy Kahnle because Tommy Kahnle has been really good in this postseason, and in the last, since he came off the injured list, he has looked outstanding, and so that's why they went to him. And it was the bottom of the order. It's not like they put Kahnle in a high leverage situation. It was, all right, go get the bottom of the order for us. And he couldn't do it. And that was the difference. And I think he would have been in that situation. In fact, I think he still would have pitched the seventh, even if Tyler Anderson had gotten through 6. I think Kahnle's still your pick. I don't think you're going to use Chris Martin on the bottom of the order there, and once you're in that situation, then they go to Yency Almonte, who was also great. I'm not going to jump into all the relief pitching decisions because I know that's our third segment, but I just want to say, I don't think it ultimately mattered, even though I agree. I think Dave Roberts probably blew that one and he should have kept Anderson in the game, but I don't know that it would have changed the outcome.
Yeah, because really, just what you mentioned, Kahnle probably still gets that time of the order if Taylor Anderson does similar to what Chris Martin did, and they would save Chris Martin probably for that next time the top of the order came up. So, but that's the way it goes, and that puts us perfectly into the next part about the bullpen and some of the decisions made, and maybe one thing I think was a little bit overblown. So we'll get into that. But real quick, thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. All right, Jeff. So the last one is the bullpen, and that seventh inning, the seventh inning that ended the Dodgers season effectively. Obviously, there was a lot of other innings that contributed to it, and a lot of other things that happened. But when it comes down to Game 4, that seventh inning was it. You mentioned Tommy Kahnle, you mentioned Yency Almonte. We'll talk about Alex Vesia and that kind of little thing. But yeah, I mean, this was a lot of people thought Chris Martin maybe could have started the next inning. That's, one decision to maybe talk about. But when you're up 3-0, when you have 9 outs to go and you have pretty much every arm, and we'll talk about Evan Phillips too, because apparently they were either saving him for the ninth or maybe didn't want to use him if they didn't need to because he had thrown the night before. but it was one of those where no matter who they put in that inning, it just seemed like it was doomed from the start.
Yeah, and I've seen people criticizing, saying, "Oh, they went away from their approach because they've been saying they weren't going to use a closer, and then they say they're saving Evan Phillips for the ninth inning." And the way I read it, that what I assume is that after Soto and Machado batted in the sixth, you do the math and you think, okay, they're coming up again in the ninth inning. And that's when I want Evan Phillips in the game. That's the impression I get. Now, why they didn't switch gears once Machado and Soto ended up coming up again in the very next inning, that's a question, but I do think there was at least part of Dave Roberts after Phillips went an inning and a third in Friday's game. It was only 15 pitches, but that up down is a big deal. There's the warm up pitches they're sitting. It's more than 15 pitches worth of work on the arm. And I think in Dave Roberts' perfect world, they save Phillips to face Machado and Soto in the ninth inning, and they're up 5-0 by then. And so they go with, you know, somebody else, Alex Vesia or whoever is still available at that point in the ninth inning. I think that's what Dave Roberts would have drawn up if he had been able to draw up a perfect game plan. But I didn't think any of the decisions in a vacuum were wrong. Obviously, the one that needs to be talked about is Vesia, and not just the fact that he came in, but the situation, circumstances he came in under, coming in a 1-0 count. And Dave Roberts said after the game that Yency Almonte was supposed to throw a pickoff throw to first base to give Vesia a couple more warm-up pitches. That got lost in translation. I don't know exactly how that happens, how that gets lost in translation. I don't know if that's a common thing. It's not a super common thing, I don't think, for managers to call for a throw over to first base. But it's not totally rare. There's definitely times when you're stalling for a reliever who's warming up. And so I don't know if that's on Will Smith. I don't know if it's on Yency Almonte. I don't know if it's on one of the coaches. But I feel like that's been overblown too, because it's a 1-0 count. It's not like Vesia came into a 3-0 count or even a 2-0 count. It's a 1-0 count. Cronenworth got the hit on a 2-2 count. So it's like Vesia was in the count, and it's not. I just have a hard time. I think he even got him to 1-2, right? Because ball two, I think, was the one that. So
based on the umpire's calls the entire night, he struck him out with the pitches that he was calling.
Yeah, the pitch that Soto stole second on would have been strike three several other times in that game. It was outside the strike zone, but it was inside John Tumpain's strike zone. I feel bad. I've always referred to John Tumpain as my favorite umpire. I can't do that anymore. I may spend some time on tomorrow's episode talking about the umpiring overall in this series, not as an excuse or anything, but just, I have strong feelings about bad umpires, even when it goes in favor of my team. But yeah, that one very easily could have been strike three. So Vesia was back in the count. The fact that he came into a 1-0 count, absolutely meaningless. It had nothing to do with Cronenworth's hit. So yeah, it's a little embarrassing, I guess. But other than that, it's like, it is so not a big deal that so many people are so upset about. And I think it's just because okay, here's something we can definitely point at. Dave Roberts screwed that up. And because I want Dave Roberts fired, that's the thing I'm going to talk about, even though it was entirely inconsequential in the game.
Yeah, it didn't matter. And at the time, you could maybe have been more upset about it because Vesia the night before was not sharp and couldn't throw strikes, and putting a guy that was already not sharp, that had pitched the day before, in a 1-0 count, maybe would have handicapped him a little bit. And, already I wasn't in love with them going to Vesia anyways, but I get it. He's lefty, Cronenworth lefty. I understand the thought process, but I didn't love that decision. But, that's just, me personally with how Vesia pitched the night before and everything else. But yeah, I mean, nobody seemed to know or wanted to, throw anyone under the bus of what happened with the communication. Will Smith kind of said, I don't know, maybe it was my fault. Maybe it was Yency's fault. Maybe it was the Bullpen. He didn't want to say whose fault it was, if there was someone at fault. And yeah, I don't think that was a big deal at all. I think it was majorly overblown. Now, if he brought him in a 2-0 count or anything more, then okay, that's understandable. You maybe didn't know what you're doing. You're maybe going a little bit Tony La Russa on it. But other than that, I don't understand what that issue is. And like I said, my issue was more with bringing Vesia in at that point. But I can understand it. But it felt like a little bit of, we have, if you haven't played the matchup the entire time and then you go to that matchup that time, it felt a little weird, especially with Vesia being on a back to back and not having looked great the night before, and your margin for error is really small. And it's not like Almonte pitched bad; he just gave up hits.
Yeah, and you were at the game, so I assume you were just watching live. You weren't watching a TV screen, right?
Yeah, I had screens around me sometimes, but not at that moment.
Because I think one of the things that had people watching on TV more upset about that whole Vesia thing is they had never shown Vesia warming up in the bullpen until right before he came into the game. And AJ Przinsky even said Vesia just started warming up. When Dave Roberts came out to visit the mound, he said Vesia just started warming up. So they're not changing pitchers. And Przinsky and Adam Amin both forgot that Mark Pryor had already visited Yency Almonte. So once Dave Roberts came out, they had to change pitchers. And so I think they didn't realize that Vesia had been warming up. And I think a lot of people watching at home took their word for it that Vesia was. So because I've seen people saying he wasn't even ready to come into the game. He just started warming up. And I don't think that's
No,
the case.
he was already warming up. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those, it's easy to, there's something else we could blame Dave Roberts for. I remember Sean Kelly, I think it was in the game against the Nationals in 2016 when Clayton Kershaw came in and pitched in relief. I think it was Sean Kelly was his name, a pitcher for the Nationals who did get brought into the game when he wasn't warmed up and ended up hurting himself. And that I think that's a fireable offense for a manager, but Dave Roberts didn't do that.
Yeah. Vesia was already warming up. The other part is Evan Phillips. Now they were, whatever you mentioned, trying to save him. He had thrown an inning in the third the night before. But this was the fireman all year. And as soon as they ran into trouble, as soon as Canely went, I think that's who they should have went to. That's, regard it's the playoffs. You were going to play 3 days in a row at that point, if you had to make it, and, you figure it out on the fly. And, I don't know. We never really got a straight answer other than we were trying to keep him for the ninth. But I don't know if there was a straight answer of let's understand again, like, okay, I understand you're saving him for the ninth, but this is the situation he's been in all year. We've seen him get out of we've seen how to get multiple occasions, bases loaded, nobody out, not giving up a run. I think maybe back-to-back nights against the Giants that one time or whatever it was. We've seen him get out of that stuff. We've seen him do well this series. And it was just a little weird for them not to do it at this point, which is why, when you're looking at all these things in a microscope, that's the one is this is what you did all year. You let Tyler Anderson go 6 innings. You brought in Evan Phillips, win the biggest points of the game, and this game you didn't do it.
Yeah, I can see that. And if I'm trying to play devil's advocate, you have to have a pitcher warm up. And I imagine they got Almonte up roughly after Canely's first batter. And at that point, you still don't realize it's going to be that situation when you bring somebody in. And if you are thinking, okay, I want Phillips the next time Soto and Machado come up, but you're not quite at the point where you yet realize, that's going to be this inning. You don't want to get Phillips up and warming up and then sit down and warm up again to come in the next inning. And so, you think, okay, well, because after the first batter that Canely faced, you're thinking, okay, Canely's probably not going to get us through this inning. So who are we going to bring in to finish off this inning after Canely gets us 2 outs with a runner on base, or something like that. And I think that's probably, and the fact is Almonte wasn't a bad option. He had struck out all 5 batters he had faced in this series, including Kim, Soto, and Machado in order in one game. And he was as good as Phillips this year, just not in nearly as much quantity because of injuries. Phillips definitely would have been the first choice, but I don't think Almonte was a terrible choice, and I can kind of understand it with everything else going on because they didn't know what the situation was going to be after Canely's third batter.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And the other part too that I've seen is, they always talk about the plan, and people think they stick too rigidly to the plan. And maybe, we don't know what the exact plan was, so we can't say for sure that the plan was this, and they stuck to that book. We can't say that for sure. But the other part is like the Hassan Kim hit was just annoying. Like that's an annoying hit down the line. Maybe could they have been guarding the lines? I don't know. I don't know. That's another decision. But realistically, that's not something you're playing for. He's not a guy that usually pulls the ball like that or anything, with any type of power Well, I guess when he does pull the ball, it's for power, but it's usually in the air. So it was just, like I said, I think no matter what that inning, a lot was going to happen.
And I'll talk about this more tomorrow. It should have been a 1-2 count because the umpire, it wasn't even on the corner. It was strike one in the strike zone. The ball didn't even touch the edge of the strike zone, and John Tumpane just missed it. And so instead of 1-2, it was 2-1. If it's a 1-2 count, Muncie doesn't have to play for the bunt, so he's 6 feet further back. That's an inning double play. That's literally a game of inches. If John Tumpane gets that call right, the Dodgers probably win that game. And which isn't to say the umpires cost us the game, blah, blah, blah. That's an excuse. But little things can make a big difference. And if there's 2 strikes there, like there should have been, based on the fact that the pitcher had thrown 2 strikes, that inning probably goes a lot differently.
Yeah. So a lot happened. I will say, realistically, you're going to talk tomorrow about umpires. I'm actually have to go back to San Diego and watch baseball. Unfortunately, I guess it's not that unfortunate, but but either way, you're going to talk about umpires. But I will say that bad umpires behind the plate cost the Dodgers more than other teams, but also this series, that wasn't, the reason they lost.
Yeah, there's never one reason, but they were part of the reason for sure. And I'll definitely touch on that tomorrow.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, you got anything else before we head out on this one?
No, this one was a little bit more fun. It's fun to be back talking with you. I think every passing day kind of softens the blow a little bit. Obviously, we're still not quite over it, but it's not quite as depressing as it was last night. And yeah, we really appreciate. Got a lot of feedback from a lot of you guys on YouTube, on social media, from a lot of you who checked out yesterday's episode. Like I said yesterday, the fact that you are showing up to listen to a podcast about the Dodgers right after the Dodgers season ended in heartbreaking fashion shows what a fan you are. And it's not lost on us. It means a lot to us. And we appreciate the Padre fans too. Keep on coming back. Yeah. And, but mostly Dodger fans. We appreciate you guys. The other guys, we're just using them for their numbers so we can add revenue.
Yeah. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Make sure to check out Locked On MLB with our buddy Sully. He's over there bringing humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the daily league, #1 daily league-wide podcasts on Odyssey app, on YouTube, or where we get podcasts, which is also where you can find us by searching for Locked On Dodgers, which is also how you can find us on Twitter and Instagram, Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you want to get a hold of us. We've already gotten a few DMs over the last few days with some other topics or thoughts that we may get into the rest of this week and into the future, because we got about 3 extra weeks to fill that we didn't think we were going to have. So, bring those questions, bring those comments, bring everything you want. You can also send it via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. or via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car or if you're at home, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.